South Carolina loses a fourth player in the transfer portal in the first 2 days of the window being opened. We talk about what it means, who they are going to replace them with, and what happens next for this team moving into the offseason. Locked On Gamecock starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. I'm your host, Chris Marler. You probably don't recognize me because I got a haircut. Very excited. We got a good show for you today. Thank you to everyone who's making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen each and every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Remember, guys, we're a free and available podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode brought to you by our new friends at Nissan. You remember the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada sponsoring today's episode. You guys heard me talk about it the other day. You'll hear me talk about it again. It's a great deal. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later in this episode. Now, let's get into today's episode, and it is going to be pretty quick, I would think. The basketball portal opened yesterday, and keeping along with that same theme of being pretty quick, 4 players entered on the first day. You lost 4 players almost immediately. Remember, you're also losing 3 players to graduation, and that doesn't even include, of those 7 total, the expectation of probably losing Colin Murray-Boyles as well, who's projected as a top 20 pick. Now, the latest player to enter the portal is Nick Pringle. He's a South Carolina native, played at Alabama a year before. I think played at Wofford a year before that. We'll do some research on that. But it's a guy that has been at his third stop in 3 years, but played a ton. Had a career year this year when he was played at Wofford, then Alabama, and now in South Carolina. But he had a career year. He becomes the 4th player to enter the portal. And we talk about what that means. So, like I said, listen, former 3-star, I think out of the 4, he's probably on the lower end of the ones you are most concerned or upset about. Losing Zach Davis is interesting. A 6'8" point guard. Those don't really grow on trees. Arden Conyers is the one that also is very, very shocking. A 6'7" shooter, shooting forward who's he was up and down this year, but also he's a Columbia, South Carolina kid. So it's just kind of surprising that those players are all gone. But I want to start with Pringle and then talk about what this means and where they're going to go next. Pringle is a guy that finished his year last year in a Final Four run with Alabama. This year, he plays all 32 games, started all 32 games in South Carolina this year. Career high with 9.5 points, 6.3 rebounds, and was averaging over 24.5 points per game. I imagine those minutes would have gone up if he didn't get, in foul trouble so often. But, all of his numbers were a career high. Most minutes, most points, most assists. Most rebounds. And actually also, most assists. He averaged over an assist per game. But along with all of that comes the fact that South Carolina had a really, really bad season. So now you're looking at replacing Jamari Thomas, Jacoby Wright because of graduation, also Benjamin Bosmans-Verdonk. They're all gone. And then with the 4 players now you have in the portal, and then potentially Colin Murray-Boyles, that is 8 guys off of a roster that is usually at most, including like the walk-ons and kids that sit at the end of the bench at come tournament time. It's over half the team. The investment that this program is going to make into men's basketball, you've already heard it was promised from Donati and the new AD that it was going to be more of a focal point. Obviously, it's not going to be up there with football. I don't know how much it's going to be up there with women's basketball. I would be hard pressed to find that you're going to put a ton more emphasis on men's basketball than women's basketball, especially when women's basketball is most likely going to be hopefully playing in the Final Four again and potentially competing for another national championship. I will also say the market for a lot of those players is much, much different than it is with men's basketball. There are programs in men's basketball this season, and there are programs that are all around the country. You're talking about Arkansas, Texas Tech, Kansas. They are going to spend between $8 and $10 million in the portal. I do not see any of that happening with, I'm sorry, not in the portal, but in general with recruiting with their NIL budget. A lot of that will be in the portal, and a lot of it will be with recruiting as well. Now, South Carolina has a top 30 class. I don't see them doing anything drastic with trying to go overspend in the portal. But as you've seen, there is a lot of emphasis that needs to be made in the portal. I don't know how many players you need to make this team a competitor right away. I do know that you need to find some, and I do know that you need to find the right ones, because if you look at Auburn, Miles Kelly, massive addition, right? Chaney Gardner-Johnson, what's his name? Cool. Girlfriend's in the house, but not listening to the show like ever. Who's 31 for Auburn?
Denver Jones?
Nope, that's not Denver Jones. Anyway,
Chaney Johnson.
Chaney Johnson is a guy that they also got from a Division II school in Huntsville. Obviously, Janai Broome. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. 6 of the 10 players on the first and second team All-SEC players are from the portal. They transferred from somewhere else. Walter Clayton, All-American, came from Iona, right? Mark Sears came from Ohio. The portal is more prevalent with instant success, way more than football is. Football, you still have to develop. Football, you have more players on a roster. Football, you also have a lot more time to develop players with recruiting out of high school. Basketball is not like that. These kids have been playing AAU and playing a bazillion games a year, and they want to play right away. Now, the money that will be flowing from some of these schools, this is where I get kind of concerned, because Arkansas spending $8 million to $10 million, I think theirs is 10, in NIL for basketball is shocking to me, because that is a school that has a really good baseball program, a really good track program. Track's not going to get a lot of NIL stuff, but a really good baseball program, so they're going to spend some money there. They are also trying to win in football and be competitive in football. And you would have to think they would allocate a decent amount of funds there as well. But their basketball program coming out and saying, we're going to spend as much as Kansas, that's surprising to me. Now, some of the other schools, like Kansas, for instance, Kansas spending that amount of money doesn't surprise me, because Kansas desperately wants to be good at basketball. I don't know the level of desperation. A lot of times desperation creates opportunity. And I don't know the level of desperation for South Carolina right now for men's basketball, because they're so good at so many other sports. I do know they want it to get better. The main thing here is, and it sounds very cliche and very obvious, but it's as true can be. If you're going to spend money in the portal for basketball, you have got to figure out a way to get the right guys in here. I thought Nick Pringle was a great ad. Colin Murray-Boyles, obviously a great addition to this team, right? But you saw stuff like at Kansas this year, right? Hunter Dickinson had been there for last 2 or 3 years and was fine. He wasn't a one-of-one difference maker you were going to get. They wouldn't spend a lot of money at Ryland Griffin, who was a shooting guard that started at Alabama last year during their Final Four run. He did not pan out very well. Then you look at other teams, like I said earlier, Auburn's a good example, that like they hit on a lot of those guys. Janai Broome, a guy from Morehead State, ends up becoming maybe the best player in the country. Mark Sears in Alabama, arguably one of the best players in the country. Walter Clayton Jr. at Florida. These are all transfer portal guys that have all become at near the top of the list, of at least in the SEC, from a competitive standpoint, and also in talent standpoint, as well as around the country. Now, here's something else. I thought this part was interesting when you talk about just the portal in general. Okay, the portal in general. Reddit CFB posted this from earlier today, and it was somebody else posted it first. But when you look at the Sweet 16 teams that are still playing basketball this weekend, right? And that's where you want to be. There's 7 teams in your conference right now that are in the Sweet 16. That's where this program wants to be. That's where they wanted to be last year when they finished 3rd in the regular season. That is the goal, and winning should always be the goal. Now, I'm looking at this right now. There are 16 teams that are left in March Madness. We'll play a little Jeopardy here. Do you want to take a guess at how many of them have a starting 5 that is solely made up of players they recruited and brought to campus and didn't touch from the portal at all? I'll give you a second. The answer is 1. The answer is 1, okay? That's crazy, and that's shocking. Duke also, that was Purdue. Purdue's the only one. Duke is a team that has 4, and a lot of that's because they're starting a lot of young players. But Arizona is one of many. I'll try to go through it without taking up too much time. But Michigan State has one team. They have 4. They didn't touch a lot of players in the portal. But there's multiple teams on here. Kentucky is one of them. Arizona is one of them. Let's see here. Yeah, like those 2 teams are – Michigan is another one. Those 3 teams, they don't have a single player in their starting 5 that they recruited to campus and it developed into a starter. They are all 5 starting 5 are from the portal. So the emphasis you have to put on here from Lamont Paris and company is really, really important. We're going to get to more of that in a second. Also, we're going to get to, I don't know if everyone saw it or not, but South Carolina won a national championship today on Tuesday afternoon. We're going to talk about that next. Locked On Gamecocks continues right after this. All right, before we get into talking more about the portal and also a Gamecocks national championship you may or may not have known, I want to tell you, want to tell you about our friends at Nissan and the Nissan Armada and the team of the week that is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On college basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart. From top-seeded stars to unexpected upsets, these guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut team of the week is the Arkansas Razorbacks. Despite losing their first 5 games, Coach Cal's Hogs found their way through the most rugged conference in college basketball to not only make the NCAA tournament, but knock off back-to-back national champion and Hall of Fame coaches en route to the Sweet 16. They accomplished all of this without second leading scorer Boogie Flan for most of SEC play, and without leading scorer and rebounder Adu Thero so far in the NCAA tournament. Now, when it comes to Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Arkansas Razorbacks have done here. It's clear that our team of the week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. All right, let's get into the second part of the show. First and foremost, I don't want to leave you hanging here on a cliffhanger. South Carolina hockey won a national championship today. Pretty big deal. Listen, they compete in Division III hockey. So it's club hockey, but they nevertheless won a national championship today. Really, really cool. It's a historic win. It's the first ever Division I. For club hockey, national champs is from last season as well. But they won the Division III national championship today. Congrats to them. Huge, huge day. It's always good when you get to add another trophy to the trophy case. So I don't know if they'll move up. I don't really know how that works for college hockey. I don't know a ton of college hockey that's played in the South. There are many, many SEC teams that are starting to get teams, whether it's club, whether it's D3 or some lower level version of it. But nonetheless, really cool. Congrats to them. So back to the portal. Now, the emphasis, again, you have on the portal, you're losing Zach Davis, a 4-star point guard. You're losing Arden Conyers, a 3-star shooting forward, losing Nick Pringle, a center. Now, and the Pringle thing is interesting because you're losing Pringle, even though he is you're basically losing Pringle in the same way because he has another year because the Diego Pavia rule. He started out at junior college, so like anybody that's a junior college player technically has another year of eligibility, except for the one kid playing baseball at Tennessee, Ozuna. That is one situation where the NCAA has not weighed in favor of the player. I don't know if that's the case here with if it'll be the case here with Pringle. Either way, what it also seems to me with Pringle is what he's doing is declaring his eligibility to be available for the NBA draft and go pro while also being able to weigh his options, because if he enters the portal, if he just declared to go pro, that's his only option, right? By entering the portal and allowing that to test the waters, he can still come back and then choose a school of his choice. Now in football, the number of players that entered the portal and then came back to the school that from where they entered the portal from was only around 4.6%. Now that's up from 2.7% from just 2 or 3 years ago, but still not a massive amount of players that are entering the portal and then taking their names out. Okay. Now basketball also is a little bit different than football, because in football you had over 2,800 total players in the portal over the last several years that had their name currently added to the portal this past year. You have over 6,000 total that are in there in general. In basketball, you had about 1,600. Now, I don't know what the total numbers are after the first day and a half. We're recording this on Tuesday, so I don't know the total numbers on it, but you would expect it to be pretty high, especially in this day and age, especially with the numbers I just told you about, with players entering the portal and trying to go to high-level D1 teams. One thing you're also going to see here, there was no coaching change in South Carolina. There's been a lot of other coaching changes around the country. I think that the place you go if you're South Carolina, I think you take a page out of other people's playbook, and I don't think you find a ton of talent necessarily in a Division II standpoint. Pringle is obviously different in terms of like JUCO players that have done well. I don't know if you go that route either, but I will tell you this. What has seemingly worked for a lot of teams in this conference is going to find the mid-majors that are, especially mid-majors newly crowned, a Division I status. I mean, Chaz Lanier from Tennessee is a guy that was at the University of North Florida. North Florida was in the Peach Belt with Francis Marion, USC Aiken, Georgia College State University like 20 years ago. That's a while. Anyway, so you look at Chaz Lanier, a guy like that. Mark Sears, obviously, like I said earlier, from Ohio. Some of these other teams, there's a lot of talent that's going to enter the portal. You have to do your due diligence, and that's the other part of this too, is with that many players entering the portal, you have got to make this a focal point of what are your needs. And for South Carolina, it's not really just one position. It could be a complete overhaul of considering the things you need. Now, you do have Eli Eliis coming in, who's an incredible recruit, and you've got a top 30 class from last year in recruiting. So there are a lot of positives of what you have coming back into next year. We've already seen in his first 2 years, you got about as good as it could get in year one versus about as bad as it could get in year two. Bottom of the standings, 2 wins in the SEC. Not great. Now, he beat Clemson, beat the brakes off of Texas, took Auburn down to the wire. They had a lot of actual wins, a lot of moral wins, and some things in between. But you also have had the other side of that with Lamont Paris, which is we saw how great he can be in year one, going 13-5 in the SEC and getting into the tournament. How do you get back to the tournament? I think that's the first goal. How do you get back to the tournament? I don't think you need to overreact here and say, we have got to be a winning record in SEC play. There were several teams. I'll pull it up just to make sure I have the actual numbers and that are correct here. But you look at the total amount of teams in the SEC that had a winning record in conference. It's not a ton. It's not a ton at all. Listen, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, only 8 teams in the conference finished with a record over 500 in conference play. Now, what that tells me more than anything is if only 8 of them had a winning record, right, but 14 made the tournament, the turnaround isn't that much of a overhaul as you might think. You know what I mean? Like South Carolina finished 2-16 in conference play. They finished 12-20 in overall. They went into conference play at 10-3. They had a win over Clemson team. It was a 5 seed. Went to the Elite Eight the year before. There were some positive things on the resume. But there are 6 teams, Arkansas, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Texas, that all got to the tournament despite only winning 6 or 8 games in in conference play. So I think that's where you start with the goal. You want to get back to postseason play. I don't think the NIT is where you want to be. I do feel like this is going to be a situation where Lamont Paris is going to have 2 more years to figure this out. I hope, unless next year is the same product he put on the court this year, then maybe that changes. But I do have the feeling that this is a 4-year process. They're not going to just overreact after year 3 unless it's something similar to what we saw in year 2. That is all for today's episode. We will be back again tomorrow. I hope all of you have a fantastic Tuesday and a great rest of your afternoon or night, whenever you're listening to this. Make sure you tune in tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Gamecocks, and we'll see you all then. Go Cox.